Hi, Alice, and welcome to the podcast.
Hi, I'm so excited to be here. Thank you for having me.
I'm so excited. It has been such a long time coming having a guest on to talk about astrology and Saturn returns, especially
hmm
because anybody who knows anything about what a Saturn return is, and we're going to dive into that obviously in the episode, when they hear about my coaching
hmm
niche and my brand, they say, "Oh my God, Saturn returns." And I'm like,
Yeah.
yes, it's super relevant. So really excited to dive in.
Yeah.
Before we do that, I would love to hear just a little intro about how you
hmm
ended up becoming the astrologer for British Vogue. So tell us everything about your journey to where you are today.
Yeah, so I started out like my first job out of college. Well, first of all, I went to grad school for fashion journalism because I thought I wanted to be like a magazine editor, like writing about fashion. That was kind of my dream at that time in my early 20s. And then so I interned a lot on the side while I was in grad school in London. And then I moved to New York and I got a job as an assistant working at Vogue.com in the US. So I was like doing a lot for helping put together shoots for the website. I also like assisted the digital director of Vogue.com. And like that was my dream job at first, but after a few months there or almost like a year there, I started to be like, is this all there is? Like I am not fully passionate about this job as I
Mm.
once was. And during that time, I discovered astrology. Well, I guess I had always like kind of kept track of my horoscope and knew I was an Aquarius, but didn't really know much about astrology by that point. But right around the time I turned 25 was when I like figured out how to read my birth chart and started practicing giving readings to people. And then over the course of the next year, I built my business up and eventually felt confident enough in my astrology business to leave that job at Vogue and set out as a full-time astrologer. And then from there, British Vogue just happened to reach out about like 5 months in to me working for myself. And they were like, hi, we've thought about putting horoscopes on our website. Would you like to audition for this role? And so I sent in mock horoscopes. They really liked them. And then, yeah, I've been doing horoscopes for them for almost 5 years.
Wow.
So,
Wow.
yeah.
I love that. I love the parts of your journey where you started off, like you said, with this dream of doing something else. That's what you really thought that you wanted in your early
hmm
20s, and then how that evolved. That's exactly what happened on my journey.
Yeah.
I was a lawyer, and
Oh my God.
well,
Whoa.
it wasn't necessarily the same as what you did, but it was that feeling of starting a job. And I think I was 25 at the time when I
hmm
started actually
Yeah.
working in the law firm after many, many years of studying and challenges to get to there. And then being, after a very short amount of time, exactly like you said, is this it?
hmm
It looked almost like it looks good from the outside. It's what you
hmm
should do. But then actually internally, it wasn't a good fit at all. And that
Yeah.
led me to obviously going along. It wasn't as quick a route as discovering what you had, discovering astrology, but
Yeah.
discovering a new path and deciding
Yeah.
something new, which actually happened to me whilst I was turning 30
Oh my
during my
God. So that was
Saturn
your Saturn
return.
return story. What's your rising
Yeah,
sign?
I am a Cancer.
Is
I have a
that,
lot of Cancer on my chart.
but is Cancer like your sun
Oh,
sign? That's
sorry,
like your
Cancer
main
is my
sign.
sun sign.
Do you know your
Yes.
rising by chance?
I think it's Cancer as well.
Okay. If that's the case, then yeah, your Saturn return would have been a lot about relationships. And then also, well, actually, what year are you born in?
1987. So I'm now
Okay. So I
36.
think you have Saturn in Sagittarius. Yeah. So that would have been a lot about changes at work because Sagittarius is your sixth house. You probably have Saturn in the sixth in your chart if you're a Cancer
Yeah.
rising. So that's literally like, how do I find deeper meaning in the work that I'm doing? And that was like a huge theme for you 28, 29, 30.
Huge
That's so
theme.
crazy.
Yeah, it was like for me, I did have also big transitions in terms of relationships during that time, but for me, definitely, career was at the forefront of that more
hmm
so than relationships. It was, and exactly like you said. Well, I love how you could just know that off by heart. It's amazing.
Yeah.
Such incredible knowledge. Like, just want all the listeners to know that I had not prepped Alice at all before this conversation with anything to do with my chart. She literally just did that like super spontaneous. So wow,
Yeah.
amazing, kudos. And yeah, like it was all about finding that passion, or the lack of passion that was missing in law was something that I was chasing after when it came to studying coaching and to help people. So yeah, that was my Saturn return. So let's dive into what a Saturn return is.
Yeah.
I've actually never in 3.5 years of the Turning 30 podcast ever really spoken about a Saturn return. So I obviously know about it. Please, can you explain it to someone who maybe has never heard of it before?
Yes. So everyone has like their birth chart, and you have all these different planets in your birth chart, like Venus and Mars, and Saturn is one of those planets. So the Saturn return is a transit. So when we're thinking about more quickly moving transits, like a new or a full moon that happens every month, like that's something that you're seeing more regularly. Whereas transit Saturn takes about 29 years to make its way through all signs of the zodiac and return to the same sign and position it was in at the moment you were born. So this happens to everyone right around the age of 29. 29 is definitely the most intense year of the Saturn return, but you kind of start to feel it in the lead up to that age, like as early as like 27, 28, and then into 30. But the Saturn return, first, like looking at the definition of like Saturn as a planet, it's very much a planet that's associated with like longevity and like what do you want to be committing to in the long term, and how can you have greater structure in a certain area of your life. So often at the Saturn return, depending on what house and sign Saturn is placed in your chart, it gets you to reevaluate that part of your life and maybe face any ways you've been restricting yourself or not fully like stepping into confidence or knowing yourself in that part of your life. So for you, it had that theme of like work, and maybe up until that Saturn return, it was really like, I don't particularly feel passionate about what I'm doing for a living. Is this really the right path for me? And then that Saturn return came along and forced you to reevaluate and put in more lasting structures that would serve you for the next few decades of your life. So it really gets you to reflect on like, what do I want my life to look like for the next 3 decades? Like you've been living your life up until that point from 0 to 29 a certain way. And then it's like, okay, now I'm my own adult. What's the most important to me? Who and what do I want to commit to? So there's like tough growing pains that really go on at the Saturn return, as like maybe relationships fall away that ultimately aren't right. Or you go through this challenging period at work where you really figure out like, what is your niche there? Also, sometimes like the topic of like family or health comes up at the Saturn return, but it really depends on like what house is Saturn placed in your chart and the themes of that house becoming the most prominent during the Saturn return.
Well, thank you so much for that explanation. So clear, so many things I want to unpack. But, whenever I just hear somebody explain to me Saturn return, I'm like, it's so crazy because it's exactly what I went through. And also so many, of my clients, my community go through. It's so apt. And for me, it really was my 29th birthday. It was, I always say my turning 30 crisis began the week after my 29th birthday. And obviously I know you don't have my chart in front of you, but from what you're saying, it's just, that was my Saturn return beginning. And what I wanted to ask, which you just mentioned at the start about, use the word tough growing pains. And I think that many people who know about Saturn return know that although often the outcome once you've gone through it is incredible, because you go through a transition and you make changes and you can really grow and, like you said, make long lasting decisions and changes. It's not easy. And can you elaborate a little bit more on it being tough? What did you mean by that, and what do you see when people are going through Saturn returns that would maybe cause them to struggle?
Yeah. So I feel like a big part of it, I guess, going through like different areas of your life and how that might manifest, like with relationships, it's often like this is a time where people are splitting off and figuring out like what direction do they want to go in. So Saturn introduces this feeling of like separateness and kind of feeling isolated. So sometimes people don't feel as close to their friends, or their friends are moving into a different life phase that maybe you're not ready for yet, or things just like aren't the same as they were in your early 20s. And then also in romantic relationships, it's often a time where you're like, okay, I've been engaging in these certain dating patterns up until this point. Like, how am I going to change my mindset around romantic relationships? Or do I really want to commit to this person further that I'm seeing? And if that isn't a relationship that has felt right, that Saturn return will often bring about the ending, because it's like that person is ultimately not meant to be your person in the long term. But like on a more positive note, sometimes the Saturn return can be a time of like learning what real commitment looks like with someone, and like maybe getting married or moving in with a partner or having like the first major relationship. And then like with career, it can be really tough because Saturn is a lot about putting in a lot of hard work and not seeing immediate results. So it can feel like you have all these responsibilities and things going on at work, but it's like, where's the payoff? And like, why is this taking so long? I would say that was a big feeling I experienced in my own Saturn return, was like, when am I going to see results here? Why do I feel so like stuck? And why is everything so frustrating?
Yeah. And I think I'm coming at it just in terms of turning 30 transitions in general, when we first start to go through those big growing pains and almost like come into awareness and decide, okay, things are changing, whether it's career, relationships, all different areas, that you feel that frustration, like you said, that frustration of it being like a longer process that you have to go through. But I'm a big believer, and I don't know if you are too, of it's just something, it's a rite of passage. It's something that we have to go through. And I wanted to ask you, what would you suggest, or almost like what advice could you give for somebody who is really feeling their Saturn return, like maybe they're just about to enter it, or they're already like in the depths of it, for how to cope with it? And is it something, this is a silly question, but does everyone have one, or does some people just not really feel it? Like, is it just kind of some people just breeze through it?
Everyone has a Saturn return. Some people have more challenging Saturn returns, maybe based on like where Saturn's placed in their chart, or like what type of personality that person has. Like people who are really like love hard work and challenges and putting in a lot of effort, they might have an easier time with their Saturn return. Whereas someone who's kind of like more of a free spirit, like likes to go with the flow, that Saturn return might be really annoying and challenging, because Saturn doesn't really allow for like that type of energy. It's not like a fun, light time. It's more like put your head down, do the work, I don't know. It's like more of a time where you want to be focused on like the smaller everyday structures in your life. So like really getting a routine in place for yourself, maybe being mindful of like how you're treating your body, kind of just figuring out what will serve me in the long term. It's not about like immediate gratification for a couple year period.
Got you. Really interesting. So you mentioned already a little bit about your Saturn return being in relation to career, that feeling of frustration, like when when will it happen? Can you elaborate a little bit about your own Saturn return and just share with us a little bit what you've gone through?
Yeah, so Saturn is located in my seventh house in my chart. So the seventh house has a lot to do with one-on-one relationships. So having Saturn there throughout my teens and 20s, like I had never really had a real romantic relationship. And dating was something I really struggled with. I didn't have a lot of confidence in that area of my life. I was always kind of like looking for the other person to like me, rather than me deciding, do I even like this person? Is this someone I want to commit to? So at the time when that Saturn return started, I had this like internal feeling of like, I need to raise my dating standards and get like really clear on what I will and won't tolerate. And I ended up getting together with my now fiance during my Saturn return. So that was like my first adult relationship where I learned what commitment looked like, how to be a partner, learning how to compromise with someone. And then also, like, I didn't mention this before, but it's not only important to look at where is Saturn, what house is it placed in your chart, but also what houses are ruled by Capricorn and Aquarius. This gets a little more complex, but Saturn rules those two signs of Capricorn and Aquarius. So those parts of your chart become relevant as well. So Saturn ruling my sixth house as well, my sixth house is ruled by Capricorn, is kind of similar to what you went through at your Saturn return, where it's like, a lot of stress and pressure at work. Also, health stuff was big for me at the Saturn return, because I wasn't someone that really like took care of my body that well. And it brought up a lot of health problems in order for me to like prioritize that more.
How long does a Saturn return usually last? Like you mentioned 29 to, was it 32, did you say?
So it varies from person to person. Usually, like the exact moment when Saturn returns to the same degree it was in your birth chart is that whole age of 29. So definitely that year. But I also count the Saturn return as the entire time Saturn is in the sign in which it was in when you were born. So you having Saturn in Sagittarius, that whole Saturn return was like 2015 through the end of 2017 for you.
Okay, so each person would depend on their birth chart, and they would have to get like a reading
exactly.
to
You would
understand.
kind of have, yeah, because it varies from like Saturn basically spends a 2.5 to 3 years in a sign, but some people are born like in the earlier part of that time frame, whereas others are born in the later part. But typically, it embodies that period of like 27 to 30, peaking at 29.
Okay, understand. Got you.
Yeah.
So, are there any other really significant ages that, as well as Saturn return? Because, as obviously we know, Saturn return is very relevant for everyone listening, I'm sure, and for this age that I'm focusing on in my coaching. However, I'm 36 and a half,
Yeah.
and I'm going through another year that I feel like is a little bit like my 29th year. Like it really honestly feels like maybe not as transitory, but it definitely has similar elements of like rebirth and like feeling like a new identity. And I was wondering, are there other significant ages that come up, or is it like Saturn return is the big one?
No, like, I mean, Saturn Return's the most talked about, but Saturn also has these other cycles where kind of a similar Saturn theme repeats in 7-year increments. So 7, 14, 21, 28, 29, and now 36. So it's so interesting that you're that age because you're 7 years on from that Saturn return at 29. So you're at your Saturn square. Saturn's in Pisces squaring that Saturn in Sagittarius placement. So you are feeling again those themes of like maybe a bit of frustration at work, or like what's next? Like how can I build more structures in my business or at work? That type of energy might be coming through. 36 is like such a major age. So that's interesting that like you're in that phase right now. Also, like the early to mid 40s is really big as well because that's a Saturn opposition. So again, this similar energy to a Saturn return, particularly around the age of 42, 43. And then you get a Uranus opposition. So that age is kind of like, I refer to it as the astrology, the midlife crisis, because it's really like, how do I release myself from all these ways I've been holding myself back and be more of my like independent person and really embrace these qualities that set me apart. And it's a time of like breaking free from restrictions. And that's like what the early 40s are about. So that's a difficult one.
So, wow, for all of those watching on YouTube, I literally have my mouth wide open when you were like, 36 is like another age, because like I'm really experiencing it. Actually, it is about career, but this time like more like relationship and entering new phase of life. And wow, it's so strong. It's so crazy to think how, for anybody who is not a believer in astrology or doesn't know about it, like it really does come up. Like it's, I'm not somebody who knew any of this before. I didn't know about 36 Saturn return. I never knew about it, honestly, even after I chose my niche and started sharing about it and started coaching people, and only then did I discover it. And it's just so interesting how apt it is and how true it is.
Yeah, that's what I love using astrology the most for, is like recognizing these like patterns that keep coming up throughout your entire life. Like you're never fully done doing work on yourself. And it's like these critical ages are the turning points when those topics become more relevant.
Wow, I love it. So you've written a book called Trust Your Timing, which the title just is everything. Just love it.
Thank you.
Because so much of what we talk about here over at Turning 30 is about, really trusting your own path, trusting your own timelines, really like letting go of where you thought you would be. And I would love you to just share a little bit about the content of the book. Obviously, it's in relation to astrology and how you can use your birth chart to basically trust your own timing. And it's specifically in relation to love, in relationships. which is obviously the key thing that we are talking about, especially at the moment. I have a course just about to come out about building your next chapter in love. And a big part of the course is talking about how to trust and have faith and really hold on to that concept that things are happening for you as they should. So I'd love to just hear a little bit from you about the book itself, but also about your perception about timing.
Yeah. So the inspiration for the book came from really how I got into astrology, which was to understand my dating patterns, like reading my birth chart and understanding like, oh, my moon is placed here, my Venus is in this part of my chart, my Mars is here, this is in my 7th house, all these elements of the chart that indicate how you act in relationships. That's what really got me hooked on astrology. So I wanted to do a book where it was really understanding your birth chart and how that shows like your approach to dating and relationships, just so you can be more self-aware of that area of your life. So rather than worrying about, am I compatible with this sign? Does this sign work with mine? It's like taking the power into your own hands and understanding like, is this really someone I want to be involved with? What are certain areas I can improve upon in how I approach dating and relationships? And then the final part of the book is about the timing, where it's how to apply transits, so where the planets are currently in the sky, to your birth chart to understand when you might have periods of greater dating activity or when a major milestone event might take place in a relationship. And that could be something like positive, like getting engaged or married, or it could be something like going through a stressful breakup or having a hard time in a relationship for a year or several month-long period. So it's understanding that timing when it comes to relationships, because my whole thing was like, I felt like I always had to be on the apps all the time and looking for someone and talking to some new romantic interest. And learning astrology helped me to realize that wasn't the case. Like there are certain times in your life when relationships are a bigger focus. And then there's certain years where that's just not the priority.
So would you say, based on somebody's birth chart, that they could then take it into their own hands by, for example, deciding, okay, for the next year, according to my birth chart, it's not a good time for me to get into a relationship. It's more about other things. Maybe it's about career. Maybe it's about my health, myself, all those other things. Would you then recommend to somebody to, for example, not almost like not feed into that friction of trying to go on the apps and just letting go and saying, no, I'm not going to try?
Yes, exactly. Or even if you still want to try, maybe just go into it with like not super high expectations, like if you enjoy dating for the fun of it. But like for people like me who would get super fixated on like, why is this not working out? Why does this person not like me? It can be very helpful because it's like, it's not working out because it's not the right time for that.
And do you really see that to be true? That like you actually see it a lot with people that you work with, that their chart really does dictate when it is a good time for them to meet somebody?
Yeah, I did. I looked at like so many charts and like identified what specific transits were going on when they got into relationships or hit a major relationship milestone. And it was like the same patterns over and over again. And I also like timed when I got into my own relationship. So I've seen it work like for myself too.
Wow, I really want to send you my
details
and be like, was it supposed to happen then? Because I went through a huge breakup when I was 33 of a 4-year relationship, and then was single for 2 years, and really felt, especially in that first year after the breakup, that I was like, okay, I'm really ready to start dating now. I was really like, oh my God, I'm in my 30s, I need to meet someone, I want to have kids, and really try to go out there and put myself out there in the apps. And every time I would date, I would be like, I just don't even want to. Like underlying, it just felt almost like dissonant. It was like, I'm doing it for the sake of doing it, but really the truth is this isn't my priority right now. I never had my chart read at that point, so I obviously didn't know, but it sounds to me like that could be because it just wasn't meant for me at that point.
Exactly, yeah. And so was that breakup 2020, 2021?
The breakup was 2020, the middle of 2020.
Okay, yeah, that was like, if you're right about the being a Cancer rising, that was like a ton of 7th house and then leading into 8th house transits, which are all about like changes in relationship and maybe like having issues that were underlying, like coming to light at that time. So that makes total sense.
There were many issues at that time, for sure. Yeah, so that's really interesting because I think that so many people, I know a lot of the listeners and a lot of my community really feel this constant pressure to be on the apps, like you mentioned already before, that it's such a feeling of, if I'm not on the apps, then I'm not doing enough. Do you feel that your almost take on it gives people permission to just not feel that pressure?
Yeah. And also, like, if you learn how to read transits on your own and you see that it's an upcoming time for relationships, it also doesn't mean that you have to get back on the apps and start trying to force something to happen. It's like that stuff naturally occurs. Like, relationships naturally come up when the astrology lines up for that to be the case.
It's actually opened up a really interesting question, and that's I keep getting when I open a quick Q&A box, and I sometimes I get asked questions in my Instagram and I really have to like sit and think about it before I answer. And somebody sent one the other day that was like, do you believe in destiny of meeting somebody, and if so, what can you do, and like, should I still take action? I can't remember exactly how they worded it, but I got to thinking about, if we fully trust our timing, then how can we almost like reconcile that with still doing things, if that makes sense? It's like, if you read a chart and you know, okay, this specific year or this specific transit isn't a good time to meet someone, so just, if you want, you can, like you said, if you enjoy dating, but if not, don't do it. The resistance to that is, well, what if you're not doing enough, like we said, but also that feeling of, and I'm sure people say this to you, back to you, like, well, should I just stop then? Like, then I wouldn't create an opportunity. What do you think about that? Do you think that it is all like destined and we can sit back and wait for it to happen? Or do you think that there is more of an active part that we play in our future?
Yeah, I love this question. I'm always thinking about like fate versus free will and like how much of your life is fated. And I think a lot of it is. But I would say when these time periods come along, it's not like the planets have a cause and effect on your life. Like, a planet isn't forcing things upon you. Like, you still have to put in some effort too. So it's like you have to remain open to saying yes to like going out and meeting people. Like, if you're just like locked away in your apartment, like, chances are is that relationship going to find you. But at the same time, it's like when those transits come along, you'll naturally feel like ready to meet new people. So it's not like something you're trying to force. Like, astrology is simply reflecting what you're already feeling in your intuition. So a lot of times before a relationship transit comes along, it's like maybe you have this internal feeling of, I would like to meet someone soon, and I'm going to start like saying yes to more social plans or joining certain like hobbies where I might meet someone. It's something that happens more naturally.
Yeah, no, I love that answer, because I think that it's what I was thinking that I would reply when I get around to doing the answers for the Q&A, was basically saying, yes, I do believe in meant to be. I do believe in destiny, and that almost like the path is written in some way, but you shouldn't be a passerby, like a bystander in your own
Yes.
fate. Like, it's all about exactly what you said, like taking control. But it's interesting to hear your take on it, that if you, like, according to your birth chart, you'll feel like you'll have an urge to do it anyway. Like, it won't be dissonant. It won't feel like
Exactly.
friction.
Yeah, like to give
What if it does still feel like friction?
then maybe it's just not the right moment for you. Like, a question I get a lot is like, did people seeing that they had a relationship transit and it didn't happen for them, and they're like, did I miss my opportunity? And I'm like, no, you didn't miss your opportunity. Like, there's going to be other moments when similar themes arise again, and dating and relationships are a bigger focus. It's not like you had this one chance and you missed out on it because you didn't feel like dating at that time.
Do people get panicked about that when they're reading their chart, that things
Yeah,
have to be a
they're
certain
like,
way?
yeah, they're like, everything said like 2023 was my relationship year and nothing happened. And I'm like, well, there will be other moments in the future. And there's kind of like, with astrology, you have to take in so many moving parts at one time as well, that if you're reading things online, like for my sign, I'm supposed to have like love in this year. It's obviously not going to be, that's not going to be true for like a 12th of the population.
And it's really interesting that you brought this up. I actually wanted to say it before and didn't have the opportunity. So I'm glad that you did. That I think so many of us were uneducated in astrology, myself included. Before I actually had a client who was an astrologist a couple of years ago, and she really helped me educate myself on it. And she actually came into my group program and did a workshop and did a separate reading for me. And I really understood that astrology isn't what we think it is, which is just our sun signs and that's it. And we think, and then people dismiss it because they think, oh, well, a twelfth of the population can't all be this personality type because we're all born in this time on these specific dates. So yeah, I just wanted to almost just say that out loud for everyone listening, that if you don't know that much about astrology, the birth chart is an amazing place to start, because it's so much more complicated than just, okay, I was born on this date and this is my, what we call our horoscope, our sign. And you mentioned before about in dating when people just say, oh, he's the other person is this sign, and then it means something. And it's just not true. That's what I was going to ask you to elaborate on that. Do you find a lot of people when they are dating, I have a friend who's like, oh no, she's a Cancer, and she's like, that's it, I can't date another Cancer, it's too much, it's too intense. I'm like, that's it, if a man tells me he's a Cancer, like, I'm not dating him. And I'm like, no, don't say that.
I know, I hate that, because it like gives astrology a bad reputation, I guess, because I feel like that's why men hate astrology so much, is because the people that they're dating like don't want to date them because they're a certain sign. But synastry, which is that comparison of one person's chart to another person's chart, it's very complex, and astrology ultimately is not able to say you are or you're not compatible with this person. Like comparing your chart and your planets and your signs to someone else's just simply shows like where the relationship might encounter challenges and where it might flow more easily. So there's really no such thing as like you are or you're not compatible with this sign.
Oh, that's so interesting. So even if somebody was to do a full analysis of both of their charts together, it would never come out as, well, you would never interpret that as, a good match. Like there's a way around it.
No, I would never tell someone that. I might be like, okay, well, maybe you might struggle to communicate in this area, or maybe you kind of like have a lack of trust with this person. Or on a more positive note, like maybe they have like a great sense of humor and you guys love to travel together. It can show things like that, but it's not showing will it work or will it not work.
Yeah. And I love that because, like you said, I think people have this perception of it being almost like a rule, and therefore because of a misconception. What does your fiance think about astrology? Is he like really into it? Was he when you met him? Like, I'd love to hear a little bit about that.
Yes, he's very open to it, which I love. He showed up to our first date having read my British Vogue weekly horoscopes. He had done research on like what his sun, moon, and rising meant. And that like was very important to me because I can't date someone that like is just very closed off to astrology. And I liked how he was open to it, and he continues to like learn more about it as we've been dating. Like now he'll give little predictions for his friends. Like his friend will be like, oh, am I going to have like career change coming up? And he's like, well, this planet's in this sign. So yes. So it's cute to see him like learn a little bit. Yeah.
And in terms of trusting your own timing and your own chart, was when you met him and even when you got engaged, was that something you mentioned before, that it was your own experience that really gave you the evidence that it works? But is that also what happened for you?
Yeah, it was. I had seen for a while, like a couple years before it happened, that like February of 2021 was like a huge relationship transit for me. Like I was like, I wonder what's going to happen then, because I've been single for like 5 years up until that point. And this was also then like COVID happened and there was like no outdoor dining going on. I was making no effort to date. And February 2021 came up and I was like, is this really going to happen? Like starting to doubt that. And then like an Instagram follower DM'd me and kind of set me up with him. So it really happened like when it was meant to. And that's kind of why it's like, just trust. You don't have to force these things. Like when it's meant to happen, it'll happen.
Oh my gosh, I'm going to send you my birth chart afterwards because it's really interesting. I'll tell you why. Because it's interesting for me because I met my partner before, like we were friends for like a year and a half, 2 years. We met like 3 years before we actually started our relationship in the work at our old jobs. And then afterwards we became friends, and only 1.5 years after we became friends and we were seeing each other a lot, like in a platonic way did we actually start dating? And I'd love to see if that was because of our charts, or because of my specific chart, that maybe there was something in there that wasn't open and ready, like we said, because it was during this time that I felt that friction. So it'll be really interesting to see if that lines up.
Yeah, I'd be curious to see like how is the meeting each other different from the like turning it into something romantic.
Yeah. Wow. Okay. If you don't mind, I'm going.
I'd love to see.
I love that. So what would you say to anybody who is listening to this and who is struggling with that feeling of trusting their timing when it comes to dating and relationships? Like, what advice would you give them?
I always say just like focus on what you love and what feels natural to you at the moment. Like, even if you don't know astrology and it's way too complicated for you to learn, like, again, astrology is only reflecting what you're feeling and your intuition. So just listen, like, is this a time for me where I want to be dating, or is this a time where I want to focus on myself and my career, my family, some other area? And I just feel like when you're in touch with what you want for yourself at a certain time, things flow more easily.
Yeah. Wow. I believe that so much as well. Thank you so much. It's been so amazing.
Thank you.
For me, so educational having you on. If somebody would like to get their chart read or learn more about you, buy your book, where can they find out more about you?
Yes, you can find me on Instagram at Stalk Alice. My website is alicebelastrology.com. I'm also on Substack with Astrology with Alice, and that's where I do like very in-depth monthly horoscopes, which are fun. And then I also have a weekly podcast called Astrology with Alice, where I go over the astrology for the week ahead and what you can expect.
Amazing. Going to listen to that, because you've literally convinced me time and time again in this episode that it really is like something I should be focusing on. So thank you so much. And I will see everybody on the podcast next week.